My guest writes about her garden of broken things. She writes about the disability that has broken her body. She is an end of life navigator, a funeral celebrant, a burial shroud maker, and the founder of the Northeast Death Care Collaborative. And she's an optimist. Oh, and you want to meet her. Stay tuned.
Welcome to Page One, the award-winning show for writers with the reader in mind.
That draws the reader along, just like fiction.
Here's your host and producer, Zita Christian.
I am delighted to welcome my guest, Dina Stander. Dina, thanks for being on the show.
I'm delighted too, Zita. Thank you for having me.
You're so welcome. Now, your book, and I'm just going to hold it up here for a moment, Housewife Blues, Dispatches from the Garden of Broken Things. I love the title. And I want to give everybody a background about the book, but I also want to get into the background of who you are and what inspired this book. And, the show is called Page One. And because of that, if the guest is an author, I always ask that author to read something from the beginning, if not exactly page one, because books are different, but from the beginning of the book. And I was looking inside yours. I read every page, every word. I would like you to read the first two paragraphs from this part at the beginning called First Words. Would you do that for us?
Sure. First words. Welcome to the Garden of Broken Things. It is a real place, a haphazard collection of plants and found objects, stones, statues, odd rusting implements, stumps, and seashells left where bees can find water. A good place to be a toad. A garden where all the favorite plates and mugs my children accidentally dropped could find new ways to be favorites. A place where a thing does not have to be whole to be of good use by contributing beauty to life. The cast iron pan that split is there, and the remains of my grandmother's fancy bowl. For a spine-injured gardener who bends gingerly and can't quite pull weeds, the Garden of Broken Things is a sanctuary filled with ordinary pleasures, an investment in beauty. It is the place where I found respite from the challenges I faced being a disabled mother raising a neurodiverse family in a world built for able-bodied and neurotypical people. My 3 children are grown now, but the garden's idiosyncrasies continue to nourish my spirit.
Dina, that's so beautiful. And everything in your book, you don't flinch at what is uncomfortable. You write with authenticity, honesty, and a certain rawness that makes people want to know things that happen. And at the same time, you have that poetic vision. It's, this is page one. Writers watch the show. You have word choices that are so evocative. And you have a way in these essays of highlighting something that is significant in a way because it's so tender or so beautiful or so painful or so horrible. And first thing I want to know is, I know these essays span 20 years. Mm-hmm. From the writer's perspective, how did you organize them? How'd you decide that?
The first thing I did was decide which pieces were going to be in the book. And then I had this sort of stack of mostly what I knew would be there. And then I went online and I looked at processes other writers had for sorting. And I looked at the photos of things spread out on walls and photos of things spread out on beds, or people who rented hotel rooms and so they could do a grid on the floor. And I was like, I don't have the energy for any of that. And I just, to a certain point, tried to arrange them not by time. It was really clear to me early that there were pieces that were written later that belong more towards the beginning of the book, and other pieces that were written earlier that belong towards the end. And it was intuitive. And at a certain point, I stopped trying and I said, this is enough. This is good enough. It flows well enough. And because I would have never sent it to the publisher, I would have just kept sorting.
Yeah. So two things I want to mention with that. You use the word enough. And every year I pick 3 words that I'm going to focus on for the year. And I have picked the word enough several times. There's a whole reflection around that word. The other thing I want to say though is, if I know you and I are both fans of the show on NBC called This Is Us. And one of the things that I found so powerful in the construction of that show, as a writer, as I'm looking at it, as like, what do you foreshadow? What is backstory? How do you handle this? And they move through time, backwards, forwards, and all mixed up in between. And once that first episode, once you get used to what they're doing, it is enormously powerful. And I see that in your choice of how you organize things. So kudos. I think that worked out really well.
Thank you.
I want to focus on, there was this one essay, you have it near the end of the book, and you write about the plan for how you were to spend a month meandering from New Mexico to California, and how your dad, a psychologist, gave you a one-way bus ticket from Springfield, Mass to Albuquerque, New Mexico, $50 for food, and a "to whom it may concern" letter that had your picture on it and was notarized, saying that you were not a runaway who needed to be returned back home. So my question is, how old were you?
15. So when I had my first child, she was about 3 months old. I went to visit my dad on his farm in Maine, and I sat down with him quietly and I said, "What were you thinking when you did that?" Because
Yeah.
what I understood holding my baby was that my father loved me that much. And he was like, it seemed like the best idea at the time, since he would have gone anyway. It was the 70s. I just need to say that there was a lot of interesting parenting choices made in the 70s.
I get it. And I'm from the 60s. So yeah, I do. But I have to say, I got to that essay, and especially that it was especially potent because it was at the end of the book. And here I'd gotten to know who you were. And I'm thinking, oh my gosh, what kind of things must have happened to her when she was younger? And I came to that essay and I thought, oh my gosh, at 15, $50 for food and a one-way bus ticket and a letter that says she's not a runaway, let her go do her thing. Um,
Yeah.
that's the stuff of a movie. I just have to tell you, there's a lot of juice in there. And I know some of the adventures that you had on that trip would definitely be movie material.
It would be.
Yes. But before I don't know if we'll have time to get into that. So if we don't, let me just say, for you in the viewing audience, you want to get the book, you want to read it. Dina has a website, dinastander.com, very simple, and you can get all the information you need there. But there was a significant person on one of those adventures that you had. I think of that Janis Joplin song about me and Bobby McGee, and it was kind of like that, only more people. But who was the drag queen who was with you on that journey?
I don't know. That is not a verified divine sighting, but fairly certain when I did the research on the timing and their shows in Chicago at that time that that was divine. And
yeah. So we're not going to get into that right now,
no,
but that is going to be
really good
wonderful.
adventure.
Yes, and that's the kind of thing that you want to read for yourself. So I think about how personal that, they're all very personal, but that one really struck me. As a mom, there's no way in this world I would have let my daughter do something like that. So I'm thinking, when you're making the choices that you had to make, because these essays are all deeply personal in many ways, and I find there's a wounding in, I won't say for sure all, but almost all of the essays. And even if it's about something beautiful, there's a wounding energy of the idea of it being lost, like your friend who was dying of cancer and this beautiful friendship. So there's this, I feel like it's like always touching on a bruise or picking a scab or something that keeps reopening a wound. And you had to like relive a lot of that as you're making the decisions about what to put in the book. So the question from the writer's perspective is, what did you leave out? What did you leave out?
I left out things that might hurt someone else, words that might be hurtful. I was nervous about my mom reading the book. My father's died, but I was worried about my mom reading the book, and she read it, and she said to me that parts of it were sharp and hard to read, but not mean, and not harm. She wasn't harmed. That the truths that were there were not harmful for her. They were just truths, and that was really that was my big worry. And that's how I made choices about what to leave in or what to leave out, and also to be careful that I was telling my story and not assuming someone else's story.
Yes.
And that, as a writer of, and I call these prose poem essays, 'cause my first book was a collection of poems, and but I do both, but my essays are very informed by being a poet. And um and in that, there's a lot of nuance in the choice of word. You can change one word and the whole thing can still be a true story, but you've taken out that thing that might harm someone else, or that told someone else's story in a way that, so that craft of telling my own story and not somebody else's, and editing for that in my own, because there's what you see in the book, and then there's everything in the trash can and littered on the floor. So
Yeah. And did you, after the book was published and after it's out, and it hasn't even been out quite a year yet, and
right.
it's another thing to talk about, but after it came out, did you have any feelings of, oh, I wish I had included, something
There
that,
was one piece I read a month or two ago that I found on my computer that I was like, wow, this really should have been in the book.
Mm.
I just didn't find it when I was hunting through my archives for what should be included. But it would have just been more. It wasn't really missing.
I gotcha. Yeah. Well,
You
and
know,
that can always be the seed for the next book.
it can go in the next one. Yeah, there's all sorts of ways that works, but there's
I,
nothing. I was looking through the book yesterday and this morning to prepare for this, and I haven't
yeah.
really looked at it for months. um you do something and then you move on, and there hasn't been a lot of opportunities for publicity or readings in person, and
Yeah.
so I was really happy looking
Yeah.
through the book and going, oh, that was a good choice, oh, that was a good
Yes.
choice, and that feels there. I have no regrets at all,
Good.
and I think I haven't touched it for a while because I thought I might, and I don't. I'm really delighted to know.
And I think sometimes you have to set your work aside for a while, and so it can harden and take its own shape.
Yeah.
And then you come back to it, and then it feels like it's strong enough to go out
Yeah,
into
it
the
sort of
world.
cures
Yes,
in
yeah,
that
that's
way.
the the some of the tension between you and your mom, and that's why I really wanted to ask about this, because I think that she read it before it was published. Correct?
No, 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 no.
Oh, so it was after, once it was done.
Yeah, that
Ah,
was a very conscious choice.
okay. Yeah, because it's done. And you had a line in part of that essay where, or one of the other essays, that you said, this late in the game, and you were talking about, your age now, in your 60s, and you've put this book out, your mom's in her 90s, a lot of tension, a lot of uh, tensions, just friction, I think, between you and your mom for a lot of time, not all the time, but it was there. And that most of the time now, everything is good, but every once in a while, some little thing pops up. And you said in the book, this late in the game, the better choice is to just let it go. How'd you come to that? Because I know people who, there's still family strife in key relationships. How do you just let it go?
With practice is the best answer I can give for that. With practice, because what is there to work out? And, I'm 60, she's going to be 92. We are who we are,
Yeah.
you know, and I'm still learning things about her, she's still learning things about me, but the past is so past. And the time it would take to keep working it out is a waste from my perspective. So I just feel like practicing letting it go is it's a practice.
I
And
like that idea because it's a practical answer. It's
yeah,
the kind of thing that you have to do. And at the same time, it's like the reality of that is, yeah, you're going to get scarred in the process. The practice, just the word implies it's going to be multiple times. And
it's a two-way street though.
yeah,
She also has to practice letting go, and she does. It is, and we're both engaged in this. It's not one
good,
way.
good. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
On many levels, that it gives me encouragement. One of the things that struck me is really remarkable in your book, and it gets into what I was talking about earlier about the authenticity, the honesty, the rawness of things that you write about. And you write about of your physical disability. And you said, I'm going to quote this: instead of overcoming, I seek to expand what I can do. And then later you said, instead, I dance with what is possible, embracing what is and making my awkward peace with reality. Oh, Dina, that whole idea, I mean, that echoes what you were saying before about letting things go, that whole idea of making awkward peace with reality. Can you talk about how, talk about the disability and how it has affected like what you write about?
Being disabled informs all of my relationships. It's my relationship with myself foremost, right? So when a person, and especially because my disability is progressive, so it's not that I have a spinal cord injury that's caused by spine disease that has no name, that I've been dealing with since childhood, and it's degenerative, and so my relationship with myself around what I'm able to do and what I want to be able to do, and the math of all that on a day-to-day basis, um, absolutely changes how I think about things, and how I make plans. And sometimes I'm in the middle of something and I have to stop because I will hurt myself if I continue.
I know
And
there was, oh, I'm sorry.
no, it's okay.
There was a place in, and I don't remember what essay it was in, but you talked about that whole idea of planning, looking at the things that you could do. And there was something like you envisioned, there was something across the street and you needed to go get it. But it was like, but the road is icy. That's not going to happen now. Just small, from my perspective, it'd be like, okay, that's a small thing. And you just, negotiate carefully, or you wear shoes that have a good tread on it. But if you fell, that would be
It depends,
disastrous.
it depends on how I fall. I had a conversation recently with a neurosurgeon about that, like how dangerous is it for me to fall? He said, it depends on whether you just topple over or whether you can break the fall in any way, and you should break the fall in any way. So,
Okay.
you know, instructions for falling are a really good
Yeah,
thing in life.
that's
Um,
that's
yes,
good.
but yeah, how a person calculates risk, and having that be self-care rather than a burden
Yeah,
or a
that's
bummer.
and that would be a
It's a
lifelong challenge for
lifelong thing,
sure.
and it's a changing thing, and sometimes there's more risk than other times. And but I mean, in today's parlance, would call it a mindfulness practice. But before we were having things called a mindfulness practice, I was working on it.
You are a woman ahead of your time in so many ways. Um, One of the things that let's get into the whole idea of things changing. One of the essays that you wrote talked about, had your thoughts on aging and beauty, and it was all under the umbrella of perimenopause. And I thought, okay, women in the audience, yeah, you want to listen to what this woman is saying. In fact, let me just pause for just a quick second here, Dina, and
Sure.
let you in the viewing audience, if you're just joining us now, this is page one. I'm Zita Christian, and my guest is Dina Stander, who is the author of this beautiful collection of essays called Housewife Blues. And it spans 20 years, and the essays in it are raw and beautiful and helpful and poetic, and on some levels disturbing. So one of the things you said in this essay about perimenopause, and I'm quoting, "I'm tired of inventing myself again and again, yet this seems to be what life requires." Talk to me
Ain't
about
it
that.
though?
Yeah, I mean, now I'm 74, so like I've passed all that part. I'm in this whole other, bend on the journey,
Well,
but I
and having
remember
to
it.
reinvent yourself and having to
Yeah,
go, what, like who expected this change? But I have to develop new muscles to meet this part of my life, whether it's delightful or challenging or whatever, and usually it's all those things. But the having, I don't have this muscle. How do I, this, whether it's an emotional muscle or a thinking muscle, like a way of thinking, because your circumstances change a lot and you have to sort of retool to deal with what's right in front of you. That. that having to reinvent ourselves, and there's no one who prepares you for that. No one says, my grandmother, my mother, my dad, my maybe my uncle who was a Zen Buddhist might have prepared me a little bit, but who tell you figure you're having one identity, and then the older you get, you're like, oh, I didn't know this was going to be included in the package.
Yeah, and on one hand, it's like, oh, this is a challenge I wasn't prepared for. But on the other hand, you can look at it and go, what kind of hidden treasures are in there? My friend, I have a dear friend, an astrologer, Ann Richards, who said to me the other day, because I was complaining about something being poopy, and she said, just remember, where there's poop, there's a pony. And I said, okay, I'm gonna keep that in mind.
I gotta too.
Yeah. Now I want to talk just a little bit here about the book itself and the process. So the title is Housewife Blues. Where'd the title come from? I mean, I know it's in one of the essays, but
It actually came from that essay.
okay.
So that essay and that essay, the title came before the rest of it. That essay started with the title. I've got Housewife Blues. That's what this is. And then I sat down and wrote it. And because it was really about, the long trajectory of what you expect when, who expects to be a housewife? I didn't.
Yeah. Yeah.
So that's where it came from. And then it seemed like of all the pieces, it was a good title.
Yeah, definitely a good title. The book was published last year, 2021. And as I said earlier, it's not quite a year old yet. But I'm wondering, did you see any difference as a writer, or how you approach the material before pandemic, after pandemic? Because this is your second book.
This is my second book, and it's everything pretty much in the book is written before the pandemic. And I really I sort of drew a line in the sand, right? Because I was pulling the book together during 2020, and I had new pieces I could have put in, but I felt like, no, these new pieces I'm writing from a different reality base. The world has really changed so much. And so, that gave me some useful constraint as a writer of like, no, I'm not including that. I'm just setting all this stuff over here, and I'm only working with this pile. That was really helpful for me. And then not stressing too much over the order of them. That was also really important in pulling this together.
So one other thing about the book, I know it contains photos, and most of them are ones that you took, but I particularly want to talk about this photo, the one on the cover.
Oh, I love that photo. So that's a photograph of the one-legged gull that is standing. You can see mist rising behind it in the photo, and it's standing just at the where the St. Lawrence River tumbles over Niagara Falls. And there's so much energy moving there. And there was this gull standing on this wall with one leg. And I was like, does that gull only have one leg? And it let me get this close to it. I was really like just feet away. And it stayed with me. And I was like, you're the disabled seagull. I've never met you before, and here you are. And we just hung out together for about 10 minutes. I took the picture and I laughed. And
it occurs to me, Dina, that here by Niagara Falls, where it's falling over, there is a one-legged seagull standing bravely, and your last name has the word stand in it, Stander. And I thought, oh my gosh, how perfect. And gosh, I can't believe the time has flown by. This happens all the time, because I'm going to have you back at some point. I want to talk with you all about your work as a death doula, a funeral celebrant, a shroud maker. That's a whole nother subject, and we'll get into next time. So for now, Dina, thank you very, very much for being on the show. I'm getting used to these virtual shows, and it's really, it's really good. I also want to thank my advisor at Cox Communications. That's Greg Thresher, who is helping me navigate this whole world of virtual interviews. And I love to close the show, page 1, with the words of the late fantasy writer Ursula Le Guin, who said, "There have been civilizations that did not use the wheel, but there have been no civilizations that did not tell stories. So find your story, find a way to tell it, maybe through essays, and join us again next time. Thank you."
Food for the crew and guests is provided by Manchester Grill of Manchester, Connecticut, and Angelo's Restaurant of Glastonbury, Connecticut.